Royal Standley of Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, offering securities through United Planner Financial Services. Member FINRA SIPC shares his planning approach to help people toward a place where they may be at peace regarding their financial goals. In this dynamic podcast, Royal will share his insights on how to design a retirement plan to help you plan for your future. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Life by Design with Royal Standley of Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors. Good morning, Royal. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm great. I'm in my house. Where are you?
In my house as well, following the stay home, stay healthy rules we've implemented here in Oregon.
Yes. And I we should have them nationwide, but I still see people. My sister works at Walmart, Royal, and she told me this weekend it was the weirdest thing because all this other stuff is happening, but Walmart on the weekend, there were families, babies in strollers, old people walking around, and she's just like, what are you doing? Why are you here? They're window shopping. They're not even just going to get groceries and going home. They're checking out clothes. They're looking at, electronics. This is real, people. Would you just please go home? So anyway, I don't know. Sorry, my rant is over. What are we talking about today?
Well, on a related topic, I thought we'd spend today talking about the passage of the CARE Act. Now, this is the third major piece of legislation that was passed to fight the COVID-19 and all of the kind of damage that we're creating to our economy by implementing all this social distancing, shutting down businesses, shutting down restaurants. This is kind of the big legislation that I think everyone was looking for to say, how do we bridge this gap? If the government's telling us that we need to shut down businesses, for the good of our populations, for the good of our healthcare systems, how do we make sure that businesses don't just disappear completely as we go through however long this quarantine / social distancing measures last? So I think this was probably the most substantial piece of legislation we've seen up until this point. I know there's a lot of pundits out there who think there's going to be additional measures, and I would say that that's fairly likely. Hopefully we don't need to pass a $2 trillion piece of legislation every 2 or 3 weeks to keep things going. But it was definitely good to see, with a minimum amount of political wrangling and political infighting, really getting a bill like this passed in a short amount of time. Now, there's a lot of pros and cons with passing a bill like that. There's definitely things in there that everyone is going to think, well, why did we do that? Why did we throw dollars at this problem, this industry, these people? When you do a bill like this, I think you're just trying to cover as many bases as possible. Yeah. And, I think it's just in this divided world, to see us come together and really not make this overly political was definitely a positive thing. Because I think most people are at home right now, sacrificing their freedoms for the overall public good. And, it's just pretty amazing to see that.
Yeah. It's hard to find a silver lining a lot of times, Royal, but in this situation, for the last 3 years, we've heard nothing but fighting from Republican side, Democrat side. And it didn't matter what side you were on. They weren't talking to each other because, right? Well, we're Democrats, so we're not going to agree with that. We're Republicans, so we're not going to agree with that. I was just so tired. I was honestly, and this is just me, but I was just so tired of hearing it all the time. And for something to happen that's going to bring those two parties together to actually make good decisions and start working together, there's the only silver lining so far that I'm really, really seeing from this, except for the fact that I get to spend more time with, family. But man, it's nice to see that. And I've heard nothing about the CARE Act, so I'm really, or CARES, is it CARES Act or CARE Act, Royal?
It is the CARES Act, and that stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act.
All right.
The government loves to put together and
acronyms,
these bills.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
There's nothing they love more than doing that. So, but overall, I think this is one of the most major pieces of legislation we've put together to fight a crisis like this ever. It is the largest, kind of dwarfs anything that we passed in the 2008 kind of Great Recession. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out and what the overall results will be from this, of how many more pieces of legislation will have to follow this. But I think this does some good things for businesses to shore up businesses to make sure that they're able to weather the storm. And honestly, more importantly, keeping families going by expanding some of those benefits and making tweaks to our system to allow people more flexibility to try to get through this indeterminate amount of time that we're going to have to continue, staying at home, social distancing, etc.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Let's get into it.
Perfect. So on the business side of things, there's a whole myriad of programs out there for small business owners and business owners. Probably the best place to go to kind of get started with that is talking to your CPA, because there are so many different programs out there. You really almost need a guide to kind of help guide you through all the different pieces of this legislation. Today, we're going to focus mainly on the individual, as that's who most of our listeners and clients are, of what this really means to them as individuals and kind of what to expect from the passage of this CARES Act.
All right. Well, as an individual and a small business owner, I'm all ears.
Perfect. This bill is really going to impact just about everybody. People who are already retired, people who are working, people who've been laid off, or who are self-employed. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is the massive amounts of layoffs that have happened over the course of the month of March.
Yeah.
We're going to see that continue into April as businesses continue looking at their costs and their payroll and just start looking for ways of getting through this period of time. We're seeing an expansion there of unemployment benefits, including kind of an additional cash benefit that's on top of your normal unemployment benefit to really help people kind of get through this time. It's approximately $600 per week, and I believe it's going to run for about a 3 to 4 month period there. So it's not a long-term benefit like normal unemployment, which can run for up to 26 weeks. They have also gone back and expanded that the length of time unemployment will run, but that extra cash benefit I think is there for people who were laid off and might just need that additional help kind of getting through.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously it's life-changing whenever you lose a job or you're laid off and you're put in a position like that. Hopefully these companies are going to be able to bring people back. I remember my father worked for Boeing, and there were different times where people were laid off, in the many, many years that he worked there. Luckily, he was able to avoid most all of them because of his skill set and being able to move around a little bit. But those are very real situations that impact families for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think these unemployment benefits are definitely a good thing because this is we won't see the kind of the speed and velocity of people being laid off like this. I don't think we've ever seen it in our history. Even with the Great Depression, we had layoffs, but nothing that kind of took place in the course of 30 to 45 days like we're seeing it unfold right now. So the other big piece of this is the talk of sending checks to individuals and families. This is really just a recovery benefit, regardless of your employment status, regardless of if you're retired or not. This is somewhat means tested because they are going to look back and see how much did you earn in 2019, and that determines whether or not you're eligible for these recovery checks.
Got it.
For an individual, they're going to receive $1,200 from the government as a payment. Basically, they're calling it a recovery rebate. You'll also get $500 per qualifying child as well. Now, to qualify for this $1,200 payment, your 2019 adjusted gross income had to be under $75,000. For a married couple, that income has to be below $150,000 for married filing jointly. All of those are going to be based on the 2019 reported income levels.
Okay.
So looking at let's say a family of two or a married couple with two kids, they're probably looking in the neighborhood of probably around $3,400 that they'll receive from these advance payments.
Wow. That's very helpful.
It is. I had I was on a local news station here recently, and the anchor asked me, well, should people look to invest these funds they're receiving? And my initial reaction was just shock of just, no, put it in the bank. We don't know how long this is going to last. I think that's probably the best thing to do at this point is to just leave that cash on hand. If you don't need it, honestly, I think there's probably some better things to do, such as maybe looking at making a donation to a food bank or another organization that might be helping people during this time of crisis. Looking at maybe some organizations that support healthcare workers or provides that personal protection equipment to hospitals and doctors' offices. There's just a lot of need out there. So I think looking at this and saying, hey, let's turn this into an investment opportunity, I think is a little short-sighted. But I think there's some good that we can do with that in our communities.
Yeah.
The other big thing that we're seeing here for individuals, and I think there's probably some confusion here, is they have waived the 10% penalty for retirement funds if you have a COVID-related distribution that you need to pull out of a 401k or an IRA if you're under the age of 59 and a half.
Okay.
So that's going to be available to individual taxpayers who are either diagnosed with COVID-19, whose spouse or dependent is diagnosed with COVID-19, or who suffers an adverse financial consequences because of, a slowdown, a layoff, a reduction of income because of everything going on here in the world right now. So the interesting thing about this is, yes, that is taxable income, but it's looking like the government is going to allow you to actually pay that back into your retirement plan over the next 3 years.
Okay.
So it's almost like creating a loan that you can take if you are affected, pull it out, and then gives you time to get it back into the plan or the 401k over a 3-year time frame. So an interesting way of kind of freeing up some of those retirement dollars. The biggest thing I would say here is I think there's going to be a lot of people who are thinking a little too short term. Who maybe don't need that money, but maybe wanted to do some home improvements or something like that, and say, "Oh, I can take a loan from here and then pay it back." That gets really dangerous, and is really pretty short-sighted. So, if you're looking at doing something like this and taking a distribution like this, you really need to talk to your tax person. You need to talk to a financial advisor to really kind of line out, okay, what does this look like? Because not only are you pulling money out of your retirement plan, but you're pulling it out when the markets are down, 20, 25, 30%. So you're already taking a haircut on that money as well. So your ability to kind of recoup that over time has somewhat disappeared. So we want to be really careful when we talk about this. Now, there are absolutely people who are going to need to take this distribution, to keep their business afloat, to keep their family afloat. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to kind of assist them through this period of time. But we just want people to be really careful and kind of go into this with eyes wide open to say, how does this affect your long-term future when it comes to planning for retirement? I completely understand the need to say, well, who cares about retirement? I just have to get through the next 3 months of no income. That's completely valid. But we just want to make sure that, people are aware of kind of those pros and cons and well equipped to make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a couple of questions for you, Royal, on that. Number one, you said you have 3 years to pay that back. I'm assuming when you say that, you're saying that, let's say they are gainfully employed again, their job calls them back, and they're putting into their 401k and they're reaching their maximum. You're saying that they can put it back, so they're putting more in than what they're normally maximum allowed to put in per year, correct?
Correct. And this legislation was just passed last week. So the actual mechanism for doing that, we don't have all the visibility on yet.
Got it. Okay.
But we'll be seeing that come out as, these bills, Congress writes the bill and puts it into law and then kind of passes it off to the people who actually write the rules and provisions of how to implement all this.
Yeah. So do we have a total yet? I mean, how much can you take out?
It's actually up to $100,000.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that should be. Hopefully that would cover somebody for 3 months. It would cover me Well, for 12 months, Royal, let's be honest. It would cover me for quite a while. So, okay, good to know. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, definitely something we want people to be educated about. That's not something you just want to kind of do willy-nilly, because it can be devastating depending on your own individual situation.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And you just don't want to miss out on the upswing of the market, because what goes down usually does come up. We've seen that time and time again. So good advice.
So the other big piece, and we're seeing this quite a bit in our practice, is they have suspended required minimum distributions for the year 2020.
Good.
So what this means is if you're over the age of, they just changed the age rules here. So currently, it's if you're over the age of 72, you're required to take out a certain percentage of your qualified retirement account. So 401k, traditional IRA, 403b. After 72, the government basically forces you to start taking distributions from those accounts. This year, they're basically suspending that rule. So that means that if you did need to pull out a certain sum of money in retirement, you no longer have that requirement. So that really opens up people who were just taking out the minimum because that was the requirement and paying taxes on it. They're actually allowed to leave that money in there and not worry about the required minimum distributions until 2021.
Great. Yeah, that's a huge advantage.
It really is, because that's money that can just be left in a portfolio to recover and grow. It is a trade-off here. And one of the reasons why this bill starts to get so expensive is, that is tax revenue the government is missing out on. So, factoring in all these different pieces, it's kind of no wonder it jumps up to a $2 trillion bill pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have not changed the qualified charitable distribution rules, however, and that is if you want to make a qualified charitable distribution from an IRA, which is not taxable, you can still do that if you're over the age of 70 and a half. So if there are some, nonprofits, churches, that sort of thing that you still want to give to, still looking at your IRA as a way of helping those agencies is still a great way of looking to give.
Great.
That kind of leads us to our next point. One of the changes that were made here was they did look at making changes to the way we do charitable giving for this year. The first one was, in the past, if you gave to charity, you would have to itemize your deductions. That still holds true, but they've actually added a $300 above the line deduction for charitable giving in cash, so that you don't have to itemize. They're trying to encourage people to give to charities of their choice by making it easier for people to claim that deduction, which I think is great. They've also
what does that mean, Roy? Let me go back. I'm sorry. What does that mean? $300 above the line deduction. What does that mean?
So in the past, if you made a charitable deduction to, church, food bank, whatever, you would have to do a Schedule A and itemize that. That schedule would include, your state and real estate taxes, your medical expenses, that sort of thing, your interest in your mortgage. And with the Jobs Act, the tax cut that we passed back in 2017, they had increased the standard deductions up to such a level, about $24,000-$25,000 a year, that most people just stopped doing that itemized deductions.
Yes.
So this is a way for people to not have to fill out that Schedule A and probably not be able to even write those off. This is a way for them to give up to $300 in this year and still get the tax credit for it.
Got it. All right. So up to $300.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Anything above that would then roll over onto your Schedule A, and you'd have to itemize. But it's just something to kind of keep in mind there. There is an extra incentive to give in 2020 because of that.
Yep. All right.
The other thing they did is when you itemize your deductions, in the past, you've only been able to itemize up to 60% of your adjusted gross income. So basically what that would mean is, if you had, let's say, $20,000 of adjusted gross income, you could only deduct up to $12,000 of that in charitable giving.
Mm-hmm.
So they removed that. So now you can actually deduct up to 100% as an individual for cash gifts.
Okay, got it.
So making that a little bit more feasible. Now, obviously, we're not tax professionals, but these are great questions to take to your tax professional and say, hey, I'm planning on making some gifts. Hey, I'm planning on making some changes to how I'm taking RMDs, that sort of thing. All of these are great things to kind of take to your tax preparer, because they're going to know how that all flows onto your tax return.
Yeah, definitely. That's great advice.
That's kind of the majority of the major changes that we're seeing for the individual. There's some other things that we'll just kind of point out. Student loan deferments for 6 months for federally held student loans.
Okay.
You want to be careful and make sure that you have a federally held student loan before you stop making payments.
Yeah.
You also want to be careful and check with your loan provider if you're in one of the loan forgiveness programs, because I know there's some intricacies there to qualify for those programs. So you just want to make sure that you're fully aware of any consequences from skipping a payment or doing anything like that could affect that loan forgiveness.
Got it. All right. What else?
The other thing, just to kind of make people aware of, this wasn't in the CARES Act, but one of the previous pieces of legislation, is they did extend the tax filing deadline to July 15th. And the state of Oregon has done that as well, and I think other states are following along with that, basically giving people an extra 3 months to finish and file their taxes, which I think is great for people who owe, and they're going to have to write the government a check. I think a lot of other people who are expecting a refund are waiting to file their taxes.
Yeah, yeah. Royal, how should people use these benefits? I know there's a lot in here, and there's a lot you couldn't even cover in this podcast, but how should people best use these benefits that they're hearing today?
Great question. I think people really need to look at using these benefits as a way of getting through this current pandemic crisis that we're going through. That's really what the government's trying to do. It's not to enrich anyone or do anything like that. I think people just need to focus on getting through the next month, 2, 3, 6, however long this current crisis lasts. We just need to be kind of collectively working together to get through it.
Yeah.
The government's given us some additional tools to help us get through this crisis. We need to make sure we utilize them and, hopefully get good advice of how to make sure that we can get through the next few months.
So that leads me to my next question. What are you telling your clients right now?
So right now, my main conversation with clients is looking at their own individual situation. I've got clients that own businesses. I've got clients that own restaurants, which are really struggling right now. I have clients who are retired and, just kind of trying to get through it. I've got a couple clients who are on lockdown in their retirement communities. It's just a challenging time, but what we're doing with our clients is we're sitting down and coming up with an individualized plan of how to kind of navigate through all this, not make any major mistakes, try to get through these next few months, looking at taking advantage of kind of the environment right now, whether it's putting money to work that's been sitting on the sidelines. It could be refinancing your home as interest rates have come down so much. It could be leaving cash on hand or maybe making some tweaks to the portfolio to make sure that they have some extra cash flow if necessary to get through this. So we're really taking an individual outlook with each of our clients of how best to navigate through all this.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Any closing thoughts for us today?
None other than, just stay healthy. I think this is a challenging time. It'll keep getting more challenging the longer this goes on. My best wishes for everyone is to stay healthy, stay sane, and we'll see you again when this is all over.
Absolutely. The stay sane, that's what I'm working on right now. Royal. All right. Thanks again, Royal, for your time today. And thank you all for listening to the Life by Design podcast with Royal Standley. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Royal comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And this is great because you can share them digitally. You don't even have to be near your friends or family because they should be in their own homes, staying away from you. Anywho, thanks again for listening today. For everyone at Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Life by Design podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The views expressed are those of the presenter and may not reflect the views of United Planner Financial Services. Material discussed is meant to provide general information and is not to be construed as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. Individual needs vary and require consideration of your unique objectives and financial situation. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Advisory services offered through Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, Inc. Securities offered through United Planner Financial Services of America, member FINRA and SIPC. Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, Inc. and United Planners Financial Services are independent companies.